When the first expansion to World of Warcraft, Burning Crusade, was launched, within a few hours, players were replacing their raid gear with rewards from the first new zone. The previous endgame, now too unrewarding for its difficulty, could just be skipped. Experienced players may have appreciated this since the fresh new content picked up basically where they left off, but the mass obsolescence of old content, and more importantly, the pattern that began with Burning Crusade, changed World of Warcraft into something like an MMO auto-scroller, where everyone, new and old player alike, is pushed up to wherever the screen happens to be. Your agency over your own progression comes second to the progression of game updates. The game levels down around you if you just wait. As standalone games, Burning Crusade and each expansion after it may have been good, but they were less like expansions and more like replacements of what came before them. This is a hallmark of power creep. Compare this to a game like Path of Exile, where the classic game is very much alive and well integrated with the new. Sure, you can still find creep, but you just don't see the same demand for classic Path of Exile as you do for classic World of Warcraft. Oddly, power creep is sometimes cited as a necessary evil or even credited for the success of big title MMOs. Hopefully this gets your skepticism tingling. In this video, I'm going to explain why power creep is always a bad thing, and how it can be stopped. Power creep is when old features are forced into obsolescence by new features. Sometimes new additions can seem better from the player's perspective, but be worse for the game. If this new helmet has higher numbers than my old helmet and is easier to obtain, as a helmet enthusiast, I might be excited, but what if that one helmet just replaced the appeal of 10 other helmets and the content surrounding them, even though there was nothing really wrong with that content to warrant being replaced? The game just got smaller, less engaging, less challenging, less replayable. Can we get the upside of fresh new content without the downside of wasting old content? Can I enjoy my new balloon without popping my old balloon? If I do pop my old balloon, my new balloon looks a whole lot better by comparison, and I think this is exactly the trick we fall for. We fail to separate the popping of the old balloon from the shininess of the new. We allow companies to profit from the disrespect of older products as an alternative to producing any value worthy of their place. This actually goes well beyond games. How much of that obsolescence was really necessary, and how much was forced?
In theory, the old world should have always retained its value, and players would have always been available in those areas for new players to experience. I mean, I think that's one solution.
While the old content isn't deleted, it's still there if you want to play it, it's deflated. In multiplayer games especially, players themselves are a major component of the content, and most of them, if they must choose, will migrate to new content even without power creep. So, if you want people to play together, isn't it better to use power creep to pull everyone into the new content rather than splitting your players up and basically making your game compete with itself? If the answer is yes, the problem is that you even have this dichotomy between power creep and fragmentation in the first place. The problem is with your game's power scale. As players progress through an RPG, their characters get stronger. This is an example graph of power versus time. Typically, there's a tutorial phase, a leveling phase, and an endgame phase. The leveling phase being where power grows most rapidly, finally flattening off into the endgame phase. The steeper the slope at any given point, the less time players spend there, and the more rapidly they out-level content and other players. If we're so concerned about fragmentation that we would consider using power creep as a tool, why the heck would we have this extreme slope and then a hockey stick into a gentle slope? Of course we misunderstand power creep. This slope creates so much content drought that people want to rush through it to reach the endgame, and the endgame is so comparatively slow progressing that it gets amputated when expansions come along, creating an even steeper slope for the next time. And it's for the sake of this slope that we apply all these ridiculous regressive band-aids. Level gating, where you can't go or are penalized for going where your power would naturally allow, or play with whom you naturally want. Auto-scaling, where the zones scale to your power, making you feel like you're on a treadmill, never leveling at all. Adaptive stats, where your character's stat ratings count for less and less as you level, making you literally get weaker in some ways. Gimmicks, where you play mini-games that bypass the power curve altogether. Pay to progress, where developers who chose the wrong profession decide to monetize the crappiness of their game by allowing players to pay rather than play their way through it. These are all just ways of covering up and never fixing the underlying out-of-control power scale. Why does this rapid phase even need to exist? Why is it so common for there to be vast expanses of content where players grind through badly scaled zones when they'd all rather rush to the endgame where the real game begins, power growth levels off, and they can actually play with their friends? Why should 99% of the content be experienced only once, or never, and 1% of the content get played endlessly to exhaustion? Leveling sucks, nerf please. Endgame grind sucks, nerf please. You can't fix it without fixing it.
If the game does indeed get good after 100 hours, why? Why do you need 100 hours for the game to get good? What is it doing after the 100-hour mark that it can't be doing before?
Well, the game evidently gets good when the power curve levels off. So, why not start it off that way? This tree graph is a game's flowchart where the splits represent features like classes, professions, dungeons, etc., and the length of the branches represent power, like level, proficiency, achievements, etc. We want a balanced tree where no branch is too long, representing bad power scaling, and no clumps of branches are too dense, representing bad feature scaling. Our challenge is to expand our game while maintaining the balance, which is hypothetically possible, and here are some best practices to that end. Split the power curve, also known as be creative. Feature shrink is just as real as power creep. For example, let's say our game has slow sword with high damage and fast sword with low damage. What next? If we can't think of something brand new, like a new stat or a new weapon type, we'll overlap the old ones and make something like fast sword with high damage, which is straight better than the old ones. This is what I mean by feature shrink, where I've basically collapsed what could have been two stat lineages into one. The right move is to use something the Extra Credits channel calls incomparables. For example, parry, a defensive stat, is unlike the weapon speed and weapon damage we already have. It's incomparable, part of a new stat lineage, a new split in the power curve. Emergent gaming is the process wherein complicated strategies are built up from simple rules. It's a player-driven force that results in things like the fractal variety of strategies and number of openers in a game of chess. Developers should draw from the creativities of their players, but remember, most of them just want to win the game using whatever works. It's your job to make the tools.
Because emergent gameplay is not always good for the game. It's not. If it's over-centralizing and forces everyone to play the same way, then emergent gameplay is definitely harmful to a game, and that's what developers are concerned about.
Emergent gaming cannot compensate for a lack of imagination on the developer's part. Expand from the bottom. Sometimes power creep happens simply because of survivorship bias. Developers tend to neglect the same features their players do, and get a skewed impression of their game upon which to base their updates.
Have you noticed whenever there's an expansion or an update to World of Warcraft, they never add content for the lower to mid levels? They're seeing statistics that people are enjoying the endgame content, so they're putting more content there. But the reality of it is, it's not that people are enjoying the endgame content, they're just not enjoying the mid-level and early-level content.
In actuality, the most popular strategy is the first place you should look for things that need a nerf, and the ones left in the dust might actually be the best designed. In League of Legends, the least popular champions are some of the most flavorful and unique due to some weakness they have. The developers of this game use a strategy that I recommend for everything. Expand from the bottom. If you're looking to fight power creep, look at some of your weakest items, your most neglected abilities, your most underplayed characters, and expand from there, growing around the disadvantages that things have. Warframe's removal of the stamina bar may have been a popular decision, but now the developers have one less tool to use. In Diablo 2, stamina becomes irrelevant, and so too does mana, like in every other game you've played. Power creep gets more likely, the more mechanics get neglected or removed. Sometimes removal is the right choice, but most of the time, developers are just causing feature shrink, when they could be expanding from the bottom. Multiply the content. If it's time to add something new, think about doing it in a way that interacts with as much prior content as possible without replacing it. When Vol Orbs were introduced to Path of Exile, suddenly all the previous items had the potential to get better in a way that didn't replace any old mode of progression. When they added Ascendancy classes, suddenly all the previous classes had more unique directions to go, without making any of them obsolete. In Magic the Gathering, companions were added as a completely new feature that had potential for everyone to use in their decks, without directly replacing anything.
Companions were a mistake, a colossal one.
Well, yeah, but the first companions released were also like the most powerful cards in the deck, which has unfairly ruined community opinion about the mechanic. The concept was right, though. Formas in Warframe and reincarnations in Dungeons & Dragons Online are all, in concepts, good ways of multiplying content, giving incentive to play through them again. So, back to that power scaling thing. Weber's law states that we tend only to notice proportional differences between things. For example, it's easier to sense a difference in weight between a pea and an apple than a pumpkin and a watermelon, even though each pair might differ in weight by the same amount. This applies to every realm of human perception, including power differences in games. To feel more powerful, you have to get stronger by some percentage. If game developers favor this, power will, of course, grow by multiples, and when you look at the big picture, it's an exponential power curve disaster. While we can't get around Weber's law, the truth is we don't need to. We know that players do not need exponentially growing power to be motivated. Look at how motivated people are to achieve small incremental growth or even purely cosmetic growth at the endgame of most MMOs. Players just want a quality game. This crazy power growth where you get 17 million times stronger between level 1 and level 20 is the runway we build for power creep to take off from, and for all this garbage to start rotting our game away. Just because it's been like that forever, or every game is like that, sometimes the status quo is the problem. Surprisingly, game developers aren't always good faith actors. I know, I kinda glossed over this earlier. If I'm developing a game, and instead of, developing it, I go, "Hey everybody, pay me money for the expansion where all the numbers are higher." I don't know, that kinda resembles pay to win. Hey, business gotta make profit, right? I mean, making a good game sounds hard, like I'd have to earn it or something. Before the interwebs, games couldn't be patched at all. They may have been less complicated, but think about how scary that is, needing a game to be perfect on release. It's a blessing to be able to update games, and we kinda waste it. The fact that power creep is even a word in common vernacular, we need to stop making excuses for it and see it for what it really is.
The mandate from management was that we needed to make expansions because expansions could go on shelves. Put a box on the Best Buy shelf that makes Best Buy happy because they get their cut.